That was so beautiful. Thank you, guys. Thank you. Oh my gosh, is that Leslie I see? Is there a baby? With you? You want a Lion Kinger? No? Okay. We have a new... Okay, sorry guys. Okay. So, this morning ends our talk series on seeking the common good. And all month we have been looking at areas of the common good in our lives, in the world. We recognize, well, our global vision says it very clearly. We have a global vision for this Centers for Spiritual Living. And it says that we envision a world where we live and act as one global family who honors and respects the interconnectedness of all life. What do you think? Do you like that? Yeah? You want to buy in? Yes, okay, so it can be all of our vision. And that's the journey we've been taking this month. And so this morning, we're talking about ethical mindfulness in everyday life. That's kind of a mouthful, right? But what it really means to me is taking time to become aware of that which we are holding as true for us, of that which we value, those things that we would stand for, becoming aware of those. What are the things that you stand for? Peace? Love. Gratitude. Family. Connection. Truth. Yeah. Equality. I love that. Kindness. Yes. And so these are our values. These are what we hold dear to ourselves, and that they are what we would stand for. And yet, it can be very hard sometimes. When we are living in the effects of life, it can be hard to stand up for what we believe. It can be hard when we're not being mindful of our thoughts and our actions and our words to really live in those values that we say that we hold so dear to ourselves. And so that's what we want to talk about today. That's what I want to share with you today is just becoming more aware of who we are and how we are in the world. But first, I want to share with you this meditation I had this week. It was really great. I was sitting in meditation, and all of a sudden, it came upon me that we are drawn together here to be examples of a higher level of livingness. We are here, we are drawn together, we are divinely drawn together here to be the examples of a higher state of livingness, of like a surge of light comes through us here. And this meditation showed the wind coming off of the waves of Seal Beach and just blowing this light out around the world and just opening up others to the possibility of awakening themselves to their spiritual magnificence. It was so great. I wish you guys were experiencing it with me. But you probably were in consciousness, right? So with that, I want to share a really big idea. It's a really grand idea. And so what we're going to do is we're just going to lean into it. Because what I know is that if you're anything like me, you want to overcorrect and like jump head into things, right? Well, that does not work. We know that. So we're going to take strides in this. And the idea is to be for something and against nothing. To be for something and against nothing. And this idea, I'm sure it's ancient and from some other wise person, but where I learned about this idea was from a speech that Dr. Ernest Holmes gave in Pacific Grove, California, at Asilomar, which is a very sacred place for many of us in this faith. And the talk that he gave was called Sermon by the Sea. And in it, he said, if I could find one person who is for something and against nothing, who had redeemed himself enough not to condemn others out of the burden of his own soul, I would find another Jesus. I would find a redeemed person, an exalted person. And so I want to share that again. Find me one person who is for something and against nothing, who has redeemed himself enough not to condemn others out of the burdens of his own soul, and I will know an exalted man. Isn't that beautiful? What a great idea. What a grand idea. You see why I say we're leaning into it? Because I know when I took on the charge to accept and try to live in that idea of being for something and against nothing, the first thing I had to do was get rid of cable, okay? Oh, I'm serious. We are all about Netflix and Hulu now. Because it was really hard for me to try to be for, not against things when all you see is negative news, right? And I'm gonna be like, the crusader, like, oh. Anyway, so I had to learn, and then there was the ego part of me that says, but you need to stay current with the events that are going on. Well, you can do that in other ways. You can read newspapers, you can listen to the radio. You don't have to be seeing and hearing and feeling the drama of it all, right? And being for something and against nothing, I also had to learn that, I'm kind of a recovering control freak who relapses frequently. And all the people in my foundations class have found this out about me recently. And that's also a part of it. It's this leaning into trying to live in this spiritual way and this idea of being for something and against nothing. And the Dalai Lama, in his book, Ethics for a Whole World, he says, if we could just take time, be mindful enough to stop hurting others through our actions and our words, we would free up a whole lot of time to start doing good in the world. And so this is really about moving ourselves from condemning and criticizing and being irritated with and frustrated with and hateful with and getting all worked up because of, and allowing that to take up all of our time and all of our space, and turn ourselves to being for something, to be caring, to concern, to have compassion, to find resolutions, to find ways to actively express peace. It's hard to do both at the same time. We don't have enough room inside ourselves, And what I'm saying is what I'm not saying is that we are supposed to let people walk all over us or buy into injustice. Being against nothing does not mean that we just allow things to go on. It means that we begin to be for the things that we believe in, for the values that we believe in, and be the examples of action in that way. And the against will just fall off, I want to share a very poignant and very vulnerable example with you that I read about in Ram Dass's book called Compassion in Action. Are any of you familiar with Ram Dass? Okay. So he had this experience where he was feeling a lot of aggression and irritation with the system. And so he took it out on a man named Caspar Weinberger, who was the Secretary of Defense at the time. And he just could not stand this man. He thought he was arrogant and had a complete lack of wisdom. And he was so frustrated with him that he felt hate inside of himself. And so what Ram Dass decided to do, he goes, I can't live like this. I'm just all worked up with anger and madness in me for this man. So he has this prayer table that he uses every morning. And he found a picture of Caspar, and he placed it on his prayer table next to all of his spiritual heroes, right? And each morning he would wake up and he would light some incense, And he would look at all of these spiritual leaders that he just felt so much love from, so much tenderness towards. And he would say to each of them, "Good morning, I love you. Good morning, I love you. Good morning." And he would just feel these waves of joy and passion and compassion. And then he would get to Casper's picture. And he felt his heart start to constrict. And he said, "Good morning, Casper." And like, and he realized, he's like, "Oh boy, I got a long way to go." And so he did this over and over and over again, like months went by, okay? And then it completely, out of the blue, like I'm sure it does for all of us, it just dawned on him. Isn't Casper just another face of God? And isn't my holding him to this idea of who he is, keeping him in mind, this person? My mind, he says, my mind is holding him to who he is instead of being open enough to allow him to evolve or change or grow, because I'm identifying him with all of this anger and angry energy. And so he said, "You know what? That's it. I'm just going to let go." And he did. And I just thought, what a beautiful example, like a very realistic example of something any of us could use or go through in our lives, where it's taking small, little, baby steps forward instead of trying to beat ourselves up for not being able to be completely enlightened after one helpful book or whatever, you know. Who does that? Some of us do that, right? We're like, "Oh, I should be somewhere other than I am right now, like spiritually, right? Like we should be further along than we are." No, that doesn't work. So what does work is saying, I'm living a spiritual life. And in this spiritual life, I am mindful enough, I am working on being mindful enough to recognize that there are values that I stand for. And I am going to take strides to put these values into action. That is spiritual living. That is being for something and against nothing. And so I want to invite us to do something. I want to go back to that first global vision. And I want to invite you, if you're new, you don't have, well, I want to invite you to hold each other's hands. What I'm saying is if you're new or if you're a germaphobe, don't worry about it. I know we've got some, it's okay. But for those of us who don't mind holding each other's hands and being collected in this intention, I want to invite you to repeat after me. We envision a world in which we live and grow as one spiritual family. That respects and honors the interconnectedness of all life. Yes. Yeah. Yes. Yes. Okay. So now I just want to take a moment and just pray with you guys. I just want to take this energy that we've built, this light that we've built, this surge of power and peace that we've built, and solidify it and know that it is our spiritual conviction here this morning is transforming our bodies, our cells, our energy, and it is lifting us in consciousness. We are peeling away the onion of our unconscious over and over and over again until finally, at last, in this moment, we recognize that we are whole, that we are enough, and that we can be for something, that we are for something. We are divine beings expressing life. This is the purpose that the Great Spirit created our life in just this way so that we might experience and lift those around us. And for this, God, I am grateful. Oh gosh, my heart, it just explodes with joy and love and gratitude for this community that we feel so empowered to put our spirituality in action, to be in this world. And for this, I say thank you. Thank you. Mother, Father, God, thank you. Yes, more, please. And so it is. Amen. Thank you. Thank you, sweetie.
Good job.
Oh, fist bump. Tag, you're it.
No pressure here, huh, guys? So, mindful ethics in everyday life, that's a pretty simple topic, huh? And speaking of simple topics, I had a phone call with my mom yesterday. And my dad passed about 2 years ago, and she's going through the final stages of finally getting her house sold in Mississippi, and she's moving back to Dallas to be close to my brother. They found a wonderful place there, and for me it's good because I can go for a week and see both my brother and my mom at the same time. But she was complaining, she's selling her house, and they always give you this pesky little inspection list of things you have to get fixed. And she was complaining about something to do with the chimney and the roof by the chimney. And she says, I don't know what all this is coming from. I don't need all this stuff. And I said to her, Mom, one person told me one time, stay on the path, put one foot in front of another, and the way will be made clear. And when she got through laughing, because she's told me that so many times in my entire life. Normally it's once in a conversation. But she said she was reading this book, this 100-year-old book called Time, Space, and Circumstance by Roy Eugene Davis, that probably only my mom, myself, and maybe Reverend Guy Williams would get a kick out of. It's a very, very old spiritual book. And she said there's a quote he says it's an ancient Chinese philosopher. He says, it's better to do nothing than to be busy about doing nothing. And I look it up, it's all over Google. Of course, it's by Lao Tzu. And that speaks on what we can gain from this Buddhist philosophy. Because they walk the path that we could walk more, where they go inside their head and they latch and tie down all the damn monkeys that we let run rampant all the time. They live the life, and what they do is they do that very, very well. And a great Buddhist author called Jack Kornfield has a great statement about love and compassion, and it's sort of the Buddhist statement. It goes like this: we all have, without exception, a very deep longing to give to our society, to work, to love, to care for this earth. That's true for every human being. And even the ones who don't find it, it's because it's been squashed or somehow suppressed in some brutal way in their life. But it's there to be discovered. We all long for that. And there's a tremendous sorrow for a human being who doesn't find a way to give. One of the worst of human sufferings is not find a way to love or place to work and give up your heart and your being to something you are compassionate about. So this is the essence of Buddhism. And this book that we're reading by the Dalai Lama is phenomenally good. And he talks about some ethics that they use. He talks about the ethics of restraint. He talks about the ethics of virtue. And he talks about the ethics of altruism. And the ethics of restraint is just walking our path and staying within our space, and especially not doing any harm to another individual, not only in action, but in our thoughts, in our feelings. Because he talks about this one sect of Buddhism, he talks about the Jain monks. And when they walk, they are extremely careful to look at the ground to make sure they're not crushing any insects as they walk. And we know how that goes. There's several people in this audience who do that. And he says, but we can't all take it to extreme. He says, know that, most religions have some rules against really horrendous things like murder and untruth and everything like that. But understand that everything we do or say has an effect. He says, so be conscious of what you say. Be conscious about gossip. Be conscious about what you do. And the ethics of virtue that he talks about is being conscious of who you are and what you're doing on a daily basis. And you're doing things that bring forth what your core values are. You have to have good core values, but you consciously become aware of that. And as we say, we like to impress upon this universal law that which we want to expand in our lives. The ethics of altruism, I'm going to share with you with a story at the end of my talk. And he gives us 3 tools. One is heedfulness. So when he talks about the ethics of restraint, he says, if we take it from a secular viewpoint, a person can find out they have diabetes. And then restraint is advised. They got to stop eating some of the food they used to eat. They got to stop doing they got to start exercising more. And when he tells a Buddhist story, and it's about a man that's tasked with carrying this big urn full of sesame oil. And there's a warrior beside him. This is a pretty brutal Buddhist story. So the warrior in his story has a sword. I'm going to make it a big club for this audience. So maybe we're more pacifists than the Buddha in some sense. And so if the man spills one drop of it, the warrior hits him. And that's what he's talking about heedfulness, because then the man is very, very observant on what he's doing. He's not doing stuff happenstance. He's putting one foot in front of another very carefully and making that happen. And then he talks about mindfulness, and his definition is gaining awareness of our patterns of thoughts and behaviors and letting go of those which no longer are of service to us. And the whole thing about is gaining awareness. And I can think of 3 examples. One is when we get into anger. When we get into anger, we're no longer thinking logically. We're reactive. We're certainly not loving. And the concept of mindfulness is having you know that you're in anger and know that that's how you behave, and maybe detach yourself a little bit from that. And the second thing that I'm thinking of in terms of that is junk food. So we all put stuff in our bodies we know is really not great for our bodies. And I'm a firm believer in the path of the Buddha, the middle path, though. So I like to think if I do 90% good stuff to my body and 10% excursions off the path, I'm okay. And the third one I'm thinking of is the phone. That's what my mom's statement was about. I'd be better off doing nothing. And ladies, you're guilty of this too. I know there's something called Candy Crush out there. You'd be better off doing nothing and sitting still and meditating a little bit than picking up your phone, checking your mail. For me, it's playing War Dragons or something silly like that. So those are the things that we can talk about in terms of mindfulness. They have this great saying in Tibetan Buddhism. It's about recalling or remembering. It's called Drenpa. And what it means is to gather oneself mentally and thereby gather one's core values. Because if you're so focused on what's going out in the external world, and you're actually just reacting to that, letting the same buttons be pushed, have the same behavior, and say, damn, why did I do that again? If you go within and focus on your core values, we know in this teaching that what we think about inside expands. So if we keep going within and not reacting and recreating our space from on high, wonderful things happen. And then finally, there's the last ethics, the ethics of altruism. And I want to share a story from one of my favorite artists, Rachel Naomi Remen. She wrote the book, Kitchen Table Wisdom. And this is a story about her. because Rachel was a trained medical doctor. Her parents were instrumental and paid for her medical school. And she was in her mid-30s. The year was 1973. And she had made her way up. She was moving up the staff at Stanford, which is a very prestigious place on the West Coast, as you know. And then something happened to her. Then she became a little bit torn because she kept having things drawn into her space where it was hers to be the healer in the way we think of things, with the mind healing the body, with the essence of oneness healing the body, rather than the curer, which is the medical term, which is using all the medical techniques, which are all well and good. They're all part of God too. And so I kept putting her in a quandary. And then someone gave her a copy of Khalil Gibran's The Prophet. And she loved the book, but there was an image that just drew her in. And that is the image of a hand with a beautiful, compassionate eye in the middle of the hand. And so this was 1973, so she loved it. She had a picture made of it, but she was embarrassed to bring it to work, so she hung it up at her home. And then a few months later, she had this wonderful notice from her boss that they were giving her this outstanding promotion within Stanford. And so she's like me, so she flies home every few weeks. Her mom had always been on the East Coast, so she flew home. And her mom said, Rachel, let's go to this park that we used to go to when you grew up. It's like a playground. And Rachel and her mom went there. And there was this young daughter with her mom there, and they were watching them. And the daughter was drawing pictures on her fingers, smiley faces, ears, eyes, whatever. And then Rachel looks at her mom, and her mom's grin breaks into a huge laugh. And Rachel says, Mom, what's going on? She says, it reminds me of you. And she said, did I draw those funny little things on the tips of my fingers? She said, no. You took your dad's Marks-a-Lot or heavy ink pen, and you would take both palms, and you would draw this big, beautiful eye on both palms. And you wouldn't want us to erase it. You try not to wash your hands for 2 days. And you'd look at us and say, I can see you now. So that was important to Rachel because Rachel knew in the Hindu tradition that picture of the hand with the eye in it depicts a healer. And so the message came loud and clear to her. She went back to Stanford, resigned her job, and for the rest of her life, she's brought that healing into the medicine world, the stuff that we know and love. And luckily for us, she brought that to us. So my challenge for you is, when you get home, take some time by yourself, go inside, and see what is your special gift that it's about time that you turn to. So you can come, be of service to your family, perhaps this community, perhaps the larger world. Because that's the essence of Buddhism, that we can applaud, that we can share, and that we can love, and that we can make our own. Thank you. God bless you.